And then that gets us to the Sunday game. And I tuned this in because Stuttgart, man, they're so good. They're such a good team this year. It's really, really impressive watching them. I watched them in the Europa League over the 2 games against Celtic. And the second game, the return leg, they pretty much treated like a friendly because they won at Paradise 4-1, right? So that was they didn't really have to do much in the return leg. And they really turned it on today. Undav again scores another goal. He's the second highest scorer in the Bundesliga. And I don't have the number in my head right now, but I think if Kane wouldn't have all those penalties, that he would be a lot closer to the top of the table, top of the goal scoring chart. In fact, I think you can actually get that real quick. When you, I'll find it throughout the podcast, but yeah, there's Undav for another goal. I think, it made the point he might be the best striker in the Bundesliga at the moment in terms of form, considering where he scores his goals, right? He doesn't have the support of scoring from the spot. Leveling, 2 goals by him, right? And he's been in tremendous form as well. Both of them doing it in a World Cup year too. I think it's going to be really difficult for Julian Nagelsmann to leave out Undav and Leveling on his squad. And yeah, I mean, Stuttgart is further cementing their place in the top 4, and Wolfsburg are now in real trouble. They're pummeling down the table. They're now in the relegation spot. And to be quite frank with you, Stefan, this looked like a match between men and boys. Stuttgart looked like an absolute top side, a team that will be playing Champions League football for the second time in 3 years, third time in a row now in Europe, and coached by a head coach. And I mean, Sepp Hoeneß, I've never seen him happy, even when they demolish our opponents. This is very, very, very Pep Guardiola / Mourinho of him. Is that he just doesn't seem happy at all. He just so demanding, right, of his players and his team, and it shows. But Wolfsburg spending all this money on all these players, and I think there's a real chance that they're going down. There's now talk that they could change coaches again. Rumors surrounding Dieter Hecking. Dieter Hecking came out of retirement to try to rescue Bochum, right? And long term, that failed miserably. And now, he's one of those other guys. He's one of those guys that whenever I think like there's certain names like Friedhelm Funkel, Dieter Hecking, Bruno Labbadia, you just know clubs are lost when these names come out of the woodwork. And I really think what you saw today from Wolfsburg is just not good enough. This club is not, despite all the money spent, that's not a Bundesliga squad that you see on the field there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the words you used perfectly there was lost. And I think Wolfsburg have been lost for quite some time now. Yeah, they've got some decent players. I mean, Wolfsburg have always got decent players because they have the money to kind of, entice players to the extent. Some they kind of stumbled upon, like Amura. Some they've maybe picked up, some that they've done well with. But there's a lot of average players there. There's a lot of money being spent on average players. And I think more than anything else, the club just doesn't really know what it's supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. I think you can go all the way back to like Dieselgate at Volkswagen to really kind of sum up Wolfsburg. I mean, I still remember back in the day when they were ambitious and had Kevin De Bruyne and Julian Draxler and players like that, and
Dieter Hecking.
Yeah, and Dieter Hecking. Hey, he made it work to an extent, but
it was a different time, right?
Yeah, it was a different time, yeah. But they had the players and they knew what they were doing and they had ambition, and I just think that's been completely sucked out of the club. I don't know if it's because Volkswagen have kind of turned off the taps and said, you guys aren't a priority anymore. There's obviously always been a struggle for Wolfsburg to kind of convince people to move there because it's in the middle of nowhere, with all due respect. And it doesn't have a thriving fan scene. The stadium's quite lifeless, to be honest with you. The only exciting thing about the Wolfsburg Stadium when I went was that they have a kind of novelty blimp that kind of flies around it. And it's a tough club to sell. And and the only thing Wolfsburg had going for them was that they had money, and that money had meant that they had smart people there who know what they were doing. They were signing smart players,
Yeah.
and they always had a good squad. And I think the big difference now is you look at that Wolfsburg team, it just doesn't have a good squad. There's some players there who quite good. I mean, like I said, Amura's the one that stands out to me. There are some other ones, of course, but it's a team that's still relying on some like Max Arnold to kind of pull the strings in middle of the park. And I'm just looking through that team right now. That entire defense. I mean, Moritz Jens. Sorry, I can't even say his name. The fact that he's become such a key player for them in defense, I think, perfectly sums up where
He was in
Wolfsburg are right now.
Scotland, right? I think.
Yeah, he was actually useless at Celtic, and
Yeah.
and to be fair, he's been much. I mean, I know he's gone on to become an important player for Wolfsburg, but I think that says more about Wolfsburg than him himself, in the sense that things haven't really worked out there. You look at that team, and you've got guys like Gerhardt, Christian Eriksen, Lovro Meyer, Patrick Wimmer. There's a lot of kind of players that could have been something that have just kind of, you know, Jesper Lindstrom as well. It's like a bargain basement for has-beens or players that could have become something and never really did. And I feel sorry for like Amura, and they've also got a great young player in Pasanovic, who I wrote a piece about a while ago. The young striker who they picked up from Bayern.
Yeah.
He's a top talent, and I think he'll go on to do well. And I think Amura will probably go on to do well as well. But there's just not enough there, Manu. And I think the really interesting thing about Wolfsburg is that, we talked about Heidenheim recently a moment ago there, and talked about how um, they've struggled because the big clubs have kind of returned to the league. And I think Wolfsburg have as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
If Wolfsburg were still a club that spent money like a top four side, and not just on transfer fees, but on wages, and had the kind of managers and sporting directors, etc., who could run a tight ship, then fair enough. But I think budget-wise and ambition-wise, they've kind of dropped down to like mid-table at best. And I think the really kind of dangerous thing in the Bundesliga right now is that mid-table is very, very tight. And when you've got your Haas-Fouls, your Freiburgs, even Mainz have kind of got their act together, Gladbach have maybe got their act together, it doesn't leave any real room for error. And Wolfsburg have been, they've been kind of floating without a paddle for a while now. So it only makes sense that if you're not good enough for a long enough period of time, you will eventually get relegated. And it feels to me like Wolfsburg are doing exactly that, because you look at the teams above them, and the only team in the league this season who's been poorer than them on a consistent basis is Heidenheim. Every other team above them, Bremen have had their moments, St. Pauli have had their moments, Mainz are in the ascendancy, FC Köln looked good in the start of the season, and okay, a bit wobbly now, but they still got stuff about them. Gladbach had a manager bounce under Polanski, Haas-Fal are having a bounce right now. All these clubs at some point this season have shown a bit of grit and determination to stay up, and I haven't seen anything from Wolfsburg since the first match day. So I'm not surprised that they're heading for relegation.
Well, it's because there's nothing there to fight for. You know what?
Yeah.
Like their transfer policy reminds me of. Do you guys have Best Buy in the UK? I can't remember if Best Buy exists.
Yeah.
Okay, so like me and my buddy, when we went on big road trips back in the day, or we went on like our teams went on big road trips, we would go to Best Buy and look at their DVD bins. For kids who don't know what DVDs are, these are like discs that you put in. You had to watch movies on them. I know everything is available online now, so maybe not everyone knows what a DVD is. But we would just go to like the bargain bin DVDs and buy like old DVDs and like, hey, this was a great movie. And then when we turn on the movie, like, this didn't age well, did it? And that's kind of like what I feel like Wolfsburg's transfer strategy has been. They're like, oh yeah, Christian Eriksen, like, yeah, no, he was great, wasn't he? And then they like put him on the field, like, this really didn't age well, did it? And so like that's kind of what it reminds me of. And I think there is a reason to why it is this way. I think that fundamentally the world is changing at the moment. The car industry in Germany is changing significantly. Factories that used to employ 200,000 people to make cars are no longer required to do so. Electric cars will come to everyone at some point. And rather than 20,000 parts, they need like what, 5-6 parts? That's it. And that will reduce the amount of people that will work in these factories. And that also reduces the makeup of society, or changes the makeup of society, not reduces it. And that means these company teams where, Wolfsburg essentially exists as a club because it is supposed to attract people to live in Wolfsburg or stay in Wolfsburg after the factory closes. But if not that amount of people work there anymore, what's the point? And Volkswagen will always sell cars. I'm sure they will get through this transition, but I think their motivation will change because of that accordingly, right? If they no longer need these mass factories, why would you need a company team? And I think there is something to be said about that in the demise of the club. And I wonder what happens if they go down. Like, does Volkswagen just say like, do we just reduce our investment and sponsorship to just the national team and have a team in Wolfsburg that maybe is a good second Bundesliga team or worse? Do we focus on the women's team that does quite well, right? And requires at this stage far less investment. And that really makes you wonder. And like, or does Volkswagen say like, Martin Kind is no longer in Hannover. That's not far away. Do we just sponsor them? Right. And I think there's it kind of underlines the change that is happening in German society at large. And, if these large factories are no longer this important, do you need factory teams to attract people? And Wolfs, like this team, more than Bayer Leverkusen, which is surrounded by big cities, it's a very different scenario. If Bayer would have to reduce the workforce, it wouldn't matter because Köln is 20 minutes away, Düsseldorf is 20 minutes away. There would be still a market. But Wolfsburg is literally in the middle of nowhere. Like Braunschweig and Hannover are close by, but these places have big teams. And I wonder if we're going to see, with the change of Germany's car industry and the way it employs people, if we're going to see the shift right there, right in front of our eyes. And if they go down to the Zweite Bundesliga, if that is it. And I'm speculating here, but I wonder if we're seeing this happening, like if we're seeing societal change play out in the Bundesliga right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think any discussion over Wolfsburg and when they get relegated begins and ends with Volkswagen's, interest in the club. And I think you make a great point as to the kind of macroeconomic issues and why a company like Volkswagen not only has bigger issues right now to deal with, but even within the kind of context of German football, they've got bigger contracts. They've got bigger commitments, as you said, with the national team to contend with. So obviously, Wolfsburg exists historically speaking, for the workers at that factory, but that doesn't really mean it has to be a Bundesliga club.
Yeah.
And I think the scary thing, if you're a Volkswagen fan, if you're a Wolfsburg fan, is that there's not going to be many people shedding a tear if overnight Wolfsburg just kind of diminishes, and becomes this kind of backwater club, or becomes this kind of like club that ends up playing in the second, third, or fourth tier of German football. And I guess to an extent it can be partly sad because we've had a lot of Wolfsburg have played a big part in modern history of German football, and obviously, people can think back to all sorts of teams and title challengers and all sorts. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what would happen to the club if they got relegated, because it's not just like a Schalke or Haasfall or someone getting relegated, who obviously will always have fan support to kind of get them back on their feet eventually. If Wolfsburg go down, there's just not a huge amount of interest in people, not a huge amount of interest outside of the club, or indeed from its fan base, perhaps, to kind of turn things around, I guess.
Especially in a year where Hannover might go the other direction, right? Because then you have the big city of that state, the capital of that state, back in the Bundesliga. And they have, I think, a 55,000 seat stadium. They were a World Cup host in 2006. It could really be a seismic shift that happens there. And I know this would be quite a lot of people that have to sell television contracts, Bundesliga television contracts, that wouldn't be too unhappy if the likes in Schalke in Hannover and maybe Kaiserslautern and so come back, and the likes of Heidenheim, Wolfsburg, and a couple other teams that are currently in the Bundesliga disappear. And that is a reality. That's an economic reality, right? And yeah, it's definitely a thing. But yeah, the relegation battle, really interesting. And I think as it stands right now, if you're Wolfsburg and rudderless and trying to bring in Dieter Hacking to rekindle the magic of 2013 where they won the DFB Pokal, good luck. I wish best of luck with that undertaking.